Irene from This Mindful Muse here, and today we are going to take a peek at, consider, and tease out some of the teachings surrounding the universal law of cause and effect. Now, there are lots of different umbrellas which we could choose to view this idea. We see this come up in various religions, spiritual teachings, and even in science. So we're just going to dip our toe on a few of these topics generally. Of course, you can always take a deep dive, and I highly suggest that you do if you find this an interesting topic. So let's start with the science, the idea that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Everything that takes place, right? Let's say if we're looking at physics, for example, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So we can see this law taking place in the physical realm. Now we're going to consider the idea in terms of a spiritual realm, that the words that we say, the actions that we take, the choices that we make, have a consequence. The idea is that sometimes they are direct consequences, sometimes they are indirect consequences. And we will come back to this to tease out in a little more detail. So now let's kind of shift our perspective, and we hear this term karma a lot. Karma, if we were looking through the lens of the Hindu tradition, and we were considering the Sanskrit word, which comes from karman, which means action. The idea is that there are lots of different kinds of actions that we can take, and therefore varying reactions, consequences, or results. There is the action of words that you say, of deeds, right? Physicalization of deeds that you embody and make choices concerning. There is the idea of accumulated karma. So perhaps if your beliefs include the idea of past lives or of generational trauma that you may be carrying, right? There may be an ongoing long-term implication from beyond simply this embodiment. And then there is the concept or idea of the present moment, that sometimes in the present moment there's an immediate reaction based off of what you have chosen to do. I really enjoy seeing this also overlap in the Buddhist tradition. The Buddhist idea of to be mindful and in alignment, right, with the highest and greatest good, knowing that there are consequences for your actions, taking accountability for your actions. We also see this in the Abrahamic tradition in terms of religions, and that there are consequences for your actions. Even the idea of judgment, right? That we put a moral value to the things that we choose to do and to the things that we choose not to do. So not only are you, in terms of radical responsibility, if we were to take radical responsibility for all the things that we have chosen or choose to do or not to do in terms of the words that we speak, the actions that we take, it can feel at times a little overwhelming. Gosh, that feels like so much. I'm so responsible for all of these things. But what can be empowering is to choose to take responsibility. The idea is that your soul is already responsible for these choices that you make, right? So why not become consciously aware and use your intention when you make choices? You can have the best intention and there can still be negative consequences. However, intention is important. I love looking at that through the lens of the Buddhist tradition as well, but also through the Christian tradition. So there's lots of ideas here to kind of tease out and toy with, and there are many other spiritual and religious beliefs that draw on these, but I think these are a few kind of major categories that we can consider. And I just kind of want to add to that too, in terms of the Jewish tradition, from the Kabbalic or the mystic concept, there is often the idea of the residual karma in terms of the idea of past lives. However, in the more grand teachings, not grand, the more general teachings, it is not always addressed. And so you will find folks of any and every religion, but especially the Abrahamic tradition I have found, where you have some folks who are in alignment and agree with the idea that there may be multiple lifetimes. And then you get the idea that there perhaps is one lifetime that we are living. Now, whatever your tradition or your particular beliefs may include, I think we can still engage with this idea, this concept of taking radical responsibility for our choices, for the things that we choose to do and the things that we choose not to do. We can see in the real world, there are real life implications. Now, if we consider that spiritually or energetically, there are added implications, there are added results, and that sometimes we feel it immediately in the moment. Sometimes we carry the weight of a choice that we have made or perhaps did not make. And the weight of that is also a result, a consequence. How interesting. How interesting to consider the idea that every single action we take or do not take, every single word that we say or do not say, has an effect on ourselves, on those around us, and if you're thinking of a ripple effect, on the outside world. Wow. It starts to put into perspective the idea that you are an incredibly powerful force. If you can impact every single thing around you with the choices you make, it's worth considering maybe then I and all things are way more powerful than we have been led to believe. Now, taking radical responsibility for your choices can feel a little scary, can feel a little overwhelming, because then you think, gosh, now I'm responsible. Now I'm conscientious. Now I might feel anxious about the choices that I make. Now, the goal is not for you to feel anxious, right? I think we live in a time and a place where our anxieties are triggered, and from my perspective, it's intentional, right? When we are making choices from fear or self-protection, those choices can often lead to, whatever our intention, negative consequences. When we make choices from trust, when we make choices from faith, whatever your faith may or may not include, when we make choices from the idea of peace, whether that means that you're standing in the strength of your peace in the midst of chaos and saying, the world is attempting to push me into this mad choice over here, and I just choose from a peaceful place to not engage. And I take responsibility for that choice. Or knowing that when you make a choice, even if your intention is to do no harm, right? That is important. That does factor in. Let's say there's accidental harm. There's indirect causation and indirect effect. Or even if your causation is direct, but then we have indirect effects. It's useful to consider this idea of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And we see some biblical reference for here too, especially in Matthew, this idea of like what you've done to the least of me, right? You've done to the most of me. Take care, treat others well. Okay, so we get that idea of the way that we treat other people, that there is on a spiritual level, on a soul level, an implication. There's a result, right? That we will be held accountable, whether in this life or in the afterlife, whether in this life or in another life, for choices that we have made. Again, that might feel a little scary, but here's what's great about this idea. What's great about this idea is that if you take responsibility for yourself, you are empowered to make choices. I love the idea. I love the concept. I love engaging with the empowering concept that we reside in a free will universe. And we see this repeated in all of the major religions And we see this repeated in a lot of general spirituality teachings and beyond. You get to make choices. Endless choices. And there are endless possible endings, results, consequences, effects. As scary as that might feel, to think, gosh, what if I make the wrong choice? I like to think that God, Creator, Source is all loving, unconditionally loving, all powerful, and gives their children, right, from this God, Creator, Source mindset, the space to learn. You learn through cause and effect. You are empowered to make choices so that you can feel the result of every choice you've ever made. And then, as long as there is a lesson learned, the choice that you made is worth something. You can learn through struggle and darkness and chaos. You can. And it seems we're very committed to that on this earth, on this spinning rock of chaos in this time. However, you can also learn through peace and love and unity. You can learn the same lesson through two very different choices. I see someone in need. I choose to look the other way because it makes me uncomfortable. Gosh, I might learn, if I were to turn to that discomfort, what makes me uncomfortable about that, right? I might learn that when I'm in a time of need in the future and folks turn their head and not look to help me, what that feels like. I might learn that it feels even uncomfortable for me not to help someone else in need, and that might mean something. And perhaps I need to, or can, pull that apart and really question it. I can also choose to help this person. And there may be direct consequences that are positive, and there may be indirect consequences that are negative. Even when I try to help someone, right? Your intention's important. Perhaps you make a choice out of the circumstances based off of who you are, what you've been allowed to engage with, what you've had access to and what you haven't, what your beliefs include, right? You make a choice. You're going to learn something. Either way, no matter what choice you make, there will be a consequence, and you can glean a lesson. Now, I'm not saying that we should choose to do horrible things. I think that we know better than that. However, the idea that when you do a horrible thing, if the result is that you learn a powerful lesson, you take that lesson into yourself and you apply that lesson moving forward, then it wasn't for nothing. It wasn't for nothing that this awful thing happened. Would you have chosen it from this embodied mindset? Perhaps not. Likely not. However, if there is a lesson gleaned from it, that is worth something. That golden rule, right, is paying you back in gold, in the worth of the lesson learned, right? Do unto others as you would have done unto you. You do your best to do unto others as you would have done unto you. Sometimes we misstep and we learn either in the moment or perhaps down the line that there is a result of that choice. And there is always nuance. There's always the specific particular circumstances in a moment. And that in one particular circumstance, you might believe, I would never make that choice. But in these set of circumstances, it's starting to look pretty good. Or I can understand why I could justify this choice. So I like to think that in terms of morality, there's no one size fits all. It is specific to circumstance. And we can always consider from an unconditionally loving perspective, as I like to believe that Creator, Source, God has when looking at us as children and saying, you're learning a lesson, aren't you? As long as there is a lesson being learned, we are not going to waste this circumstance. We are not going to waste this situation. We are not going to waste this result. Now, folks can go into maybe this person is having a bad life because they were a bad life before. Is that possible? Maybe. Maybe they've chosen to take on this to learn lessons for their soul progression. Maybe they're having a shitty life because someone out of their own free will made some shitty choices, and these are the repercussions. These are the effects of someone else's choices. Maybe this person is carrying and will learn to transmute, transform through the darkness so that others can see that that is possible. Perhaps they are transmuting and transforming the heaviness of generational trauma. So there's so many varying situations and circumstances that we can be in. But here's what's important. Here's what I'm going to invite you to engage with. When we take radical responsibility, when we decide I am responsible for me, I am responsible for the choices I make, I'm responsible for the choices I have made, I am responsible for the choices I will make. Despite how scary that might feel, empower yourself to know you are a co-creator in this universe. And that as long as you can, from your perspective, assign meaning. And I think oftentimes the most useful meanings are lessons learned. If you can take a lesson from a heavy circumstance to then apply in a future circumstance or apply for someone else's benefit, that's really powerful. Even circumstances that you would not choose from this embodiment, from this mindset, right? Perhaps your soul decided to struggle in this way to learn a lesson. Maybe. Perhaps it's happening because of the choices of others. Perhaps it's just happening. Maybe from this mindset, you would not choose that. Maybe you didn't. Either way, if you can look at it and say, this is heavy. I don't know how or why I would have ever chosen this, but I'm going to take radical responsibility to learn a lesson from this. What is the lesson? What is the lesson that I'm learning from this? And they can be many lessons. It can be that you don't need to be in this mindset of suffering. It could be that this is a repercussion of a choice that you made. Maybe we don't make those choices again. It can be that you are intended to be an example for someone on the outside who needs to see someone take something heavy and dark and turn it into something light and peaceful and loving. That you will not be a victim to the dark, sometimes circumstances that occur in life. So when we take radical responsibility, we go from being a victim, the victim mentality, things happen to me, to empowerment, things happen for me. Even if I can't in the moment see how this is going to serve me, I can, as a co-creator, assign a meaning to that and make it worth my time, although I wouldn't have chosen it. So if we start to think about this idea of karma and that we are radically responsible for ourselves, it also frees us of the responsibility of other people. If someone is acting a fool, if someone is acting questionably, their choices and behavior are not your responsibility. Now you can care, you can offer suggestions, you can attempt to lead by example. You can even say directly to them, I do not think this is a healthy choice for you. However, you are not responsible for their choices. You can, again, attempt to assist, attempt to help, attempt to guide. At the end of the day, you are in a free will universe. That means not only are you responsible for your choices, they are responsible for theirs. And if someone does you wrong, now it may hurt to watch someone that you care and love go down a dark path, and you can wish for them wellness and you can pray over their lives and you can send them love. They will at some point, experience consequences of their choices. And that is quite a lesson to learn. And their soul deserves to learn lessons just like yours. Now that is hard. It is hard. And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't attempt to step in and assist to an extent, but how do we honor the free will of another person? How do we honor consent above all else? They have the same amount of free will as you, and they are allowed to make their own choices. Now, what this also means, someone does you wrong and you are feeling a little bitter, you don't have to worry about them getting what's coming to them. Now, I don't mean in the idea of like karma's going to come and beat you up. I think that sometimes people can enjoy that idea of karma when they're feeling indignant or angry with someone else. And yet at the same time, they might be afraid, oh gosh, this karma is going to come and get me. It's the law of cause and effect. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. If this person chose to behave in this less than positive way, rest assured, there will be a reaction. There will be an effect. And sometimes it's hard when you're watching in the moment and you say, when? When will there be an effect? When will I see them crumble? It isn't up to you. That's what is so beautiful, is that you don't have to worry about it. They are not your responsibility. You can wish them learning. You can wish their soul growth, while you also wish and engage with your own learning and soul growth. They're not your problem. They're not your responsibility. The universe is the ultimate equalizer. You can let that go. You can let that go. So here I want to tag on to the end of this conversation something that I find profoundly powerful and absolutely gorgeous is the idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness. What an easy thing. Who gives a hoot? Why should we care about forgiveness? I'll tell you why you should care about forgiveness. It's likely that you are carrying things that you have not forgiven yourself of. When we continue to punish ourselves for choices that we have made, beyond taking radical responsibility, I'm sorry, universe, I'm sorry, person, I'm sorry, circumstances, I behaved in this way, I have learned my lesson. It's the job of the universe to dole out the effect. It's not your job to punish yourself. It's not. It's not your job to punish others, and it's not your job to punish yourself. And so if you're choosing not to forgive yourself, BB, you're doing the job of the universe. It's not your job. We live in a time and a place where there's lots of programming and conditioning where we are trained to punish ourselves. And I can relate to that. It is still something that I struggle with on a daily basis. So from my perspective, I believe that all of the ascended masters, whether you want to look at them through the lens of a savior, whether you want to look at them through the lens of a teacher, whether you want to look at them through the lens of an extension of God, a son of God, a child of God, a representation of the fact that we are all fractals and fragments of God, or an extension, a breath, and a separate being of God. The idea of forgiving yourself and forgiving others is so powerful that there are entire religions built around it. Do I think that those teachings can be distorted? Yes, I think that they can and have been distorted in many ways. However, let's not lose the lesson that a whole person came and embodied in order to teach humanity, which includes you deserve forgiveness. All you have to do is take accountability. Forgiveness, and some of these concepts, and I really enjoy this idea, forgiveness is the release trigger for if you believe in the karmic wheel. Forgiveness of yourself, forgiveness of others, and asking for forgiveness as well is the mechanism that keeps that cause and effect. It is the emergency brake exit. It is the lever of get me out of here. It is the gift. What does that look like? Let's say you're carrying the guilt of having made a choice that resulted in harming of yourself, someone else, or both, maybe energetically, mentally, emotionally, physically. And you are carrying that. And you believe because you did this bad thing, maybe it was a bad thing, because you did this bad thing, that you deserve to be punished until the end of time. You are actively holding yourself to this idea of the karmic wheel and thinking that you should be doing the work of the universe, which that's not your job. Your job is to be an embodied individual learning lessons, to be a soul progressing. And so as long as you are learning a lesson, even if it's through the heaviness, you're doing your job. That's what you're here to do. And to learn to forgive yourself, take full accountability, make different choices, help others perhaps not to make that same choice, while respecting that they have free will and their own choices. Taking radical accountability means that you can and should also practice radical forgiveness. That's easier said than done, but when you release yourself of the chains of bondage of I should punish myself until the end of time because I'm guilty and I'm a bad person, I will tell you, as a neurospicy person who occasionally engages with rejection, sensitivity, dysphoria, I know a thing or two about self-imposed punishment. The inner narrator who spirals you until the end of time. I'm not saying that I understand how your brain works, and I'm not saying that I understand how you feel, but I want you to know that you're not alone. And that although it can be hard to sometimes even believe that you deserve it, you're here to learn it. It's part of the curriculum. It's part of your cosmic curriculum. You weren't created to only feel pain and suffering and then to punish yourself. You're here to feel love and peace and pain and suffering, and still to choose to do better. Still to learn and practice how to forgive yourself and others. Now, if you buy into the idea of the karmic wheel, let's say you do, and let's say you don't. Either way, let's just imagine that these consequences, right? If someone else owes you a debt, you can choose to release that debt. You can choose to release them of that suffering, which lightens your soul, your being, your energetic presence. And if you believe in multiple lives, etc., it frees you from having to do it again. It says, look, I got a C on this test. I feel complete and whole. I don't want to retake the entire grade to go through this final exam again. I get it. I get the lessons, and I don't want them to fail this grade and have to retake the entire grade. Instead of us both having to now retake the entire grade and try again, I'm going to take a C. Or I'm going to take a B plus, and I'm going to let them take a D, right? Or a C minus. I'm going to give them a free pass, not because they don't deserve to learn a lesson here. No, their soul deserves to learn the lesson. But I'm not going to hold them to us doing this dance again because I don't want to do it. I don't want to go through again another incarnation, another turn of the wheel with this person. That is true empowerment. That is true free will. It's saying, I'm not holding this person to this suffering because I've made some pretty choices myself. And others have either had the goodness in their heart to not hold me to that suffering, or I have given myself the gift of not continuing to punish myself through that suffering. And I know the God, Creator, Source did not make me simply to suffer and punish myself until the end of time. Amen. So whether you want to engage with this from a religious perspective, a spiritual perspective, or just a practical application of, I don't want to carry the bullshnickety of all of this stuff, this trauma. When you don't forgive yourself, when you don't forgive someone else, you continue to carry it. Your load is heavier. You carry that with you. And it colors the way you see everything else. It has a tint to it. If you were wearing these glasses, they would have a tint. And perhaps the world might look a little darker through those lenses, through that tint that colors everything ever so slightly. From this weight that you are carrying that you can just take off. So the idea of forgiveness is this beautiful gift. So the idea of forgiveness is this beautiful gift that I believe Yeshua, Jesus, came here to reteach to humanity as this is the greatest gift you can give yourself. This is a gift I'm giving to humanity. You can do what I can do and even more. You deserve to live peacefully and in love and light, and to forgive yourself and others. Now, if you don't jive with Yeshua, if you're not in alignment with Christianity, you don't have to be a Christian and you don't have to agree with the church's teachings to see that forgiving yourself is really powerful and a gift that you can give yourself and to other people. So, whatever vehicle you are using to get to your desired destination in this life and beyond, whether that be a religious, a spiritual, or a practical perception of the world, I trust is serving you. And I trust that as long as you are, whatever is occurring, taking radical accountability for the choices you are making, accepting, learning, questioning, receiving a lesson from the things that you have experienced, whether the results of others' actions, and you self-apply so you don't have to make that choice and then have a cause and effect, from your own choices, from the energy that we were born into. Give yourself the gift of practicing not only radical self-acceptance, radical self-love, radical accountability, radical free will, radical forgiveness. It feels so soft, it feels so light. How could that be that powerful? It can literally give you an exit ramp off of a karmic wheel turn, if you believe in that. And if you don't, it can literally change the way that your nervous system carries you from day to day. It can literally change the beliefs that you have about yourself and your inner narrator who twirl whirls around you at 3 o'clock in the morning, telling you all sorts of things that may not be helpful. It can literally reprogram that inner child who leads the self-protection charge, those red flags of I'm freaking the heck out, that your subconscious mind sends through your subtle body up to your conscious mind to say, I'm freaking out. We should be panicked. We're going to live in panic because that will somehow help the circumstance. It can literally change the way you walk through this world. It can literally change the way that you see this world. Remove the tent, the color that impacts the way you see everything around you. So I'm going to stop going on and on. You get it. You get it. I get that. You get it. They get it. I think they get it. You got it. So just to review, we talked about the scientific law of cause and effect. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. We talked about the idea of the universal law of cause and effect in the concept of spirituality, that it kind of dips its toe into, I would say, in one way or another, every major religion. And that whether you're coming at this from a practical perspective or a spiritual development perspective, perhaps there's religious seasoning added on top, or perhaps that's the meat of your meal. Just a gentle reminder that you can feel empowered by the choices you make. When you make mistakes, as long as you're learning a lesson, you are doing your job as a soul embodied in this time and place. And that the next step, and this may be really uncomfortable for some, the next step is to practice radical forgiveness of yourself. And I want to add that if you're not able to forgive someone else, which is understandable, some people have done atrocious things and you think, why do they deserve forgiveness? If you're in a place where you're like, I can't offer that to them, forgive yourself. Focus on yourself. Focus on your inner world. Focus on releasing yourself from being tricked by this person, for letting something happen to you. That perspective. I'm not saying that you actually did let something happen to you. I'm saying that sometimes we have that inner narrator that tells us, why did you let this happen? Why did you allow this to happen to you? Say, I learned a lesson. From this perspective, I would not have chosen that suffering. And I forgive myself. Give yourself that gift. Because you deserve it. Another reminder, you're not responsible for the choices of other people. So you can attempt to guide, you can make suggestions. It is not your job to save everyone, even though it's hard. It is really hard to watch suffering, and there are things that you can do to help lessen suffering. There are things that you can do. Do those things. But you got to stop short of imposing on someone's consent, even when it's hard. But that frees you from having to punish other people. They're not your responsibility. That person who did that awful thing to you that you're struggling to forgive, okay, you can't forgive them. Work on releasing yourself from carrying the shame, blame game. That is an incredible gift that you can give yourself. It's the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Taking radical responsibility for the choices that you make, and when you make mistakes, because we're only human. We're here to get messy. We're here to make mistakes. A la Miss Frizzle, the Magic School Bus, if you've ever watched a Magic School Bus episode, if you're of my generation. Give yourself that gift. We can talk about in another episode. How do we practice forgiveness for ourselves? How do we work through that when we feel so unworthy? How do we break down those belief systems, and how do we reprogram ourselves? Well, gosh, there's so many steps to that, and I can't wait to dive into that topic. But I thought that for today, we would just start with this law, and we would think about it, question it, see how we can apply it from a general perspective to all of these varying belief systems, religions, spiritual application, and practical application as well. I hope that you have a gorgeous rest of your day. I hope that you feel empowered to take radical responsibility. And when you take responsibility, part of your job is learning to forgive yourself. If you're not ready to forgive someone else, I say don't worry about them. Start with you. Give yourself the gift of releasing yourself once the lesson has been learned. I think you get it. I love you so much. Thank you for sharing time, space, and energy with me, and I'll see you around. Bye.